Ahlan wa sahlan, shalom from Jerusalem. This is Al-Sharq Al-Awsat Lana, Man, our Middle East together. Jews, Christians, Muslims, Turkmen, Baluchis, Druze, you name it, we have it in the Middle East. And today we're going to be talking about Joe Biden brokered normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Is it a White House honey trap or a real pathway to progress towards peace in the Middle East? Join us. Once again, I have the great Yoni Ben Menahem, one of the top strategic security intelligence analysts in Israel, talking about a very important topic, Yoni. Is this the real thing, Saudi Arabia-Israel normalization, brokered by Joe Biden, President of the United States, the White House? There are many questions going on about all three actors here, normalization, the Middle East. First of all, what is from your information that you're receiving from the Arab world, what's their take on the latest Washington moves in order to broker a possible normalization deal between Jerusalem and Jeddah?
Well, I have to tell you on a personal note that I'm very worried because my Arab sources, is what they tell me is something similar to what you said in your opening. This is some sort of presidential or White House honey trap for Israel. And why is that? Because it's no secret. Prime Minister Netanyahu, after he was elected again in the last elections to be a prime minister, he stated very clearly that his main goal is to have peace or normalization with Saudi Arabia. He said that this is one of the goals of his government. Now, what the Arabs are saying is that President Biden, he knows that. This is what the CIA, the experts for the Middle East tell the president. You know, you have a way here to ban the Netanyahu government because Netanyahu wants this very much. He wants it to be part of his legacy. So how do we do that? We put this bait of normalization with Saudi Arabia, but we condition it with two things. First thing, dismantle the right-wing government in Israel and put in the other parties like Yesh Atid of Yair Lapid and the Machaneh Mamlechti of Benny Gantz, put them into a new coalition, and then we can use the normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia to preserve the two-state solution and have Netanyahu commit to create an independent Palestinian state in the areas of Judea and Samaria. That means freezing the settlements and withdrawing to the 67 lines, including East Jerusalem.
But the Saudis know that is a non-starter. I mean, there are two people in Israel, maybe, that accept the idea that Israel would even consider withdrawing to the unstable 1967 lines, which would make Israel a completely indefensible country. Every Arab country knows that. Every political leader in Israel knows that. It's a complete non-starter.
This is what we said before the withdrawal from Gaza Strip. And what happened in the end? Prime Minister Ariel Sharon at that time, at the end, he withdrew from all of the Gaza Strip. Now, I know that the West Bank is different. Of course, Jerusalem is different. But still, it can never happen when politicians want to have a legacy and they change their mind. You don't know what kind of pressures are put on them and what are their personal considerations. This is very alarming. I'm very alarmed for what is happening.
We have to create context for our viewers, Yoni. If we go back to 2020, I think the United States is trying to do a copy-paste of the situation in the spring of 2020, just before the Gulf, just before Bahrain, the UAE, Morocco came forth and signed the Abraham Accords with Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu at the time was seeking to apply Israeli sovereignty over the Jewish communities east of the 1967 line in conjunction with the Trump administration. Those were discussions that were going on behind the scenes with Ambassador Dermer, as well as the American administration. even at the signing of the Abraham Accords in the White House, you heard Prime Minister Netanyahu, even at the surprise of President Trump, say, and thank you very much to our American partners for coordinating on Israel's right to apply sovereignty to Israeli communities. So here the United States is saying, if you give that up as one of the conditions, and you agree to the establishment of the Palestinian state, they have not used the language 1967 lines. They've used the language of a Palestinian state. And of course, they say no additional building of what they call settlements, what we call communities. And in 67, that will pave a pathway towards Saudi normalization. It sounds to me like a diplomatic honey trap because of the fact they know that there is no government in Israel that would agree to withdraw to borders that are 9 miles wide at their narrowest point. It would make Israel basically a suicide mission for itself.
You're right, but for what I hear from the Palestinians, and especially at the top of the PA, people very close to
Mahmoud Abbas,
the head of the PA, that in the last visit when he was in Saudi Arabia and he met with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, he got promise from him, a personal promise from him, that there will be no peace, no normalization with Israel without an independent Palestinian state in the borders of 67, the lines of 67. You have to remember also the Arab Peace Initiative started as a Saudi peace initiative, and it's talking about withdrawal to 67 borders and the establishment of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. So, do you think that Mohammed bin Salman will give up the legacy of the Saudi peace initiative? Do you think that it's reasonable? I think that the fact that the Americans so far did not bring up the Palestinian issue when they talked to the Israelis about the contacts with the Saudis, they didn't bring up yet the Palestinian issue because they know that this is a very sticking point. So they are very careful. They are saving it to the last, to the end of the road.
The Americans historically and currently misread the Middle East. They've been misreading the Middle East for the last 100 years. And I say this as an American Israeli. They continue to misread the culture of the Middle East. You're an expert in Palestinian political culture. You're an expert in Islamic political culture. As they say in Hebrew, let's talk about, from a Saudi point of view, if you think, or I think, that Mohammed bin Salman is going to give the prize of normalization to this American administration, I think we're joking ourselves.
I agree with you, because there's a personal grudge between Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and President Biden. The way that President Biden tried to humiliate him, the problems that they made the Democratic administration, especially President Biden, they made to Saudis over the Adnan Khashoggi killing, assassination, whatever you call it in Turkey. This is very alarming. And Mohammed bin Salman, of course, is not going to give any present to President Biden. He's not going to deliver this. I think he will wait for the Republican, hoping that there will be a Republican president in the White House to give this present to him. But still, just the fact that they're talking about it and negotiating about it might create a precedent, a very dangerous precedent for Israel, because withdrawal from the West Bank, from Judea and Samaria, is out of the question. Look what is happening now. And we remember what happened in Gaza Strip, how in 2007, Hamas kicked the PA out of Gaza Strip with a coup d'etat and took over the Gaza Strip. What is happening in the Judea and Samaria now is very similar. The PA is getting weaker and weaker. Mahmoud Abbas is going to step down soon because of health problems or other problems. And if there will be elections eventually in the West Bank, all indications are that Hamas will take over the West Bank. So what do we need? We need another terror entity also in Judea and Samaria, in addition to Gaza Strip. This is what we want.
I'm sure that Israel's security echelons, beginning with Herzl Halevi, to the head of the Mossad, to the head of other security establishments in Israel, are saying the exact same thing that you're saying right here. It's very clear But
but those who make the decisions are the politicians.
That's
not the
true. That's true.
Not
but
the security establishment.
I would proffer that very few Israeli politicians, perhaps except Ariel Sharon, have ever made decisions in complete contradiction to what the heads of Mossad, military intelligence, and others tell him. Having said that, I think we have to look at this from a U.S. point of view. The normalization from the point of view of President Biden is a burning interest, even more than, I would argue, even more than Benjamin Netanyahu. Look, Netanyahu clearly wants to leave a legacy of normalization. He said it publicly time and time again. Having said that, Yoni, there is quiet normalization between Jerusalem and Jeddah right now. Just 2 weeks ago, a young group of Israeli girls and boys from the Israeli Gaming Association get into Saudi Arabia on Israeli passports. There are Israeli
So why don't we settle with that and wait for the for the new administration? Why do we have to run into these negotiations with the Saudis? Why?
I don't think we're in negotiations with the Saudis.
The Americans are negotiating.
Exactly. So this is an American normalization deal, not an Israeli normalization deal.
It's a triple.
It's a triangle.
Yeah, it's a triangle. Israel is part of it. But you mentioned the American politics. You can't disconnect what is happening from the American politics because Biden is preparing himself for the presidential campaign. He needs some achievement in the Middle East after the failure of the United States.
Afghanistan failure.
Yeah. The renewal of diplomatic ties between
Iran and Saudi
brokered by China.
Failure.
Yeah, it's a big failure. So everybody feels the weakness in the Middle East, feels the weakness of the United States. So he needs some sort of an achievement to present to the American public. Look, I'm doing something good in the Middle East.
Yeah. The problem that we continue to face, is that American administrations, I think with the exception of the former administration, always use Israel as the fall guy, if you will, in order, either the fall guy or the link in order to bend, in order to get a quick win, what we say in American English, because we need a quick win here.
Yeah.
There is no quick win in the Middle East. The Middle East, from its beginnings 1,500 years ago until today, is a slow, painful, and sometimes bloody process within the Arab world, whether it's Sunni and Shia, whether it's radicals and more moderates. This is simply not going to be a quick win. From the U.S. point of view, they use the Palestinian issue as what they think is a quick win issue because it looks, it looks far easier than it is, even though over the last 30 years of Oslo, it has been a veritable disaster for U.S. policy. And obviously, on the 30th birthday of Oslo, Israel is drawing conclusions. I must say, just as a quick plug, the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs has written the first ever research policy compendium on lessons learned from 30 years of failed policies at Oslo, and we will be releasing that very shortly. But going back to the United States believes that it can really pressure Israel at this particular moment. Israel is in full domestic distress right now, divisiveness within the Israeli body politic. But having said that, it's very, very clear that from an Israeli point of view, you said it a couple minutes ago, there is quiet, technical, let's call it normalization minus between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And you know what? With regard to the Iranian regime, without going into too much detail, there are aspects of the relationship between Israel and its Arab partners that are better left kept quiet.
There's another point which is very important. So far we spoke about the Palestinians and the possibility of a Palestinian state. There's another Saudi demand which is very worrying. They want, as part of this deal, they want the United States to supply them with a nuclear reactor. They say that this is for peace purposes, but we know how it starts. Once you get a reactor to enrich uranium, you can then go to the military track and enrich uranium to the military level, exactly like the Iranians are doing. Now, this is very worrying the security establishment in Israel. I spoke to a senior security source and said they were very worried because now we know that Saudi Arabia is controlled by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. But what will happen if in the future the regime in Saudi Arabia will change and there will be somebody who is very extreme and somebody anti-Israeli and maybe cooperate with Iran, then they will have another a possibility to manufacture nuclear weapons against Israel. So this thing of the nuclear reactor that the Saudis are demanding, Israel all along rejected and told the Americans that are against it. Now there are signs that maybe Israel will agree to such a thing. This is very worrying.
Well, only agree to it if, in fact, normalization is part of this triangular deal. But I'll tell you something even more worrying. From the point of view of Saudi Arabia, the Palestinian issue is far less important than winning the agreement of Washington to supply a civilian nuclear reactor. So you can see a scenario whereby the United States says, you know what, special defense capabilities, yes. You know what, civilian nuclear capability, yes. Normalization, no.
The stealth aircraft.
The stealth aircraft supplied to Saudi pilots, yes. So all of a sudden you've got a bilateral agreement that gives the Biden administration a win. And instead of normalization with Israel, it can be denormalization and decoupling between Saudi Arabia and Iran and the Iranian regime, because that's what the United States wants. The United States wants to break up this new engagement between the Iranian regime, China, and Saudi Arabia, and in a sense reconstitute the classic American-led security architecture
on the expense of the state of Israel.
Also, correct. Yeah, and that's without normalization.
Yeah, without normalization.
So that's the real, I think that's a bigger worry.
But I think, as you said, they don't understand anything in the Middle East. I don't think they understand that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is not stupid. He will enjoy both worlds. He will take what he can from the Americans and also keep good ties with the Iranians. He will not do this switch that they are hoping he will do. He will not switch. Yeah, he will not do that.
No, he will. He's going. Mohammed bin Salman is a visionary. He has positioned the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, KSA, as the startup kingdom of the Arab Muslim-led Middle East. He sees Israel as startup nation. He wants Israeli technology. His Excellency wants Israeli innovation. And he also wants, in my assessment, Yoni, a strong, resilient Israel. He does not want to see a weak Israel. In fact, that's why under the Obama administration, bin Salman turned towards Israel and green-lighted the Abraham Accords, is because of and due to American weakness. So it's not all a dark and cloudy picture here. Yeah. There is, but Israel has got to maintain its strength, its resilience, and Netanyahu knows how to be stiff-necked against security threats when he needs to be.
Yeah, we hope that, because the danger that I see is not from the Saudis, it's from the Biden administration. This is the danger that I'm seeing, because I feel that there is some sort of a trap here to make Netanyahu bend politically and security-wise, and give concession to the Palestinians, and this is very worrying.
Look, if we look at what's happening in the hills of northern Samaria, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of the Iranian regime is on the ground in Jenin as we speak.
Not only in Jenin,
in Nablus
and
Tulkarm, that's right.
All the north of the Samaria.
For sure. And people have a hard time understanding, and this is a point both you and I have made. You've made it in Arabic and Hebrew. I've made it in English, that this is a pincer war by the IRGC against Israel, and people who know a little bit about local geography know that northern Samarian Hill Ridge overhangs Ben Gurion Airport and the Tel Aviv area. So, in fact, what the Iranian regime has been trying to do is to entrench its operatives and its proxies, namely Palestinian Islamic Jihad, namely the Hamas, and other smaller units. You've talked about the Lion's Den and other individuals that it arms, directs, finances, inspires. They are hanging over Tel Aviv. This is why this this is really a strategic war over Israel's home front.
And as you know, in the last few weeks, they started even launching rockets already, primitive rockets, but there is an infrastructure there in Jenin area of the Hamas. They call it Yahya al-Ayash Battalion, and they are starting to launch rockets towards Israel, towards Israeli settlements. They're planning to attack Afula, Hedera with rockets. This is very worrying. So far, the Israeli army and Shin Bet, they have not been successful in arresting this infrastructure's member. But this is very worrying.
But that's exactly why, Yoni Ben Menahem, it's really an impossibility. I'll go on record as saying it's an impossibility that Israeli political and security echelons would agree to any kind of far-reaching pullback in the current environment. It's simply clearly suicidal to anybody that understands the Israeli geopolitical and security picture.
It's not only to agree to a pullback. I'm sure that maybe you're right, but just to agree in a matter of principle for the creation of an independent Palestinian state, or for freezing the settlements, This is very worrying. And this is what the Americans are demanding from Israel.
You know what is extraordinary, Yoni, as I think about it, is the Americans were witness guarantors to the September 1995 Oslo Interim Agreement. In that agreement, which established the Palestinian Authority, also established the right of Israel to build homes and porches and settlements and you name it in areas under its control. And it controls, by agreement, Area C, 60% of Judea, Samaria, what much of the world calls the former West Bank of Jordan, illegally, by the way, illegally and in an unauthorized way, it must be said, even though the kingdom is a partner of Israel's for peace, certainly at the governmental level, but they took those lands in the 1948 war. They were not assigned to it by the UN. In fact, the UN said when the Jordanians took, just as an historical point, when the Jordanians took that land back in 1948, they said it was the first act of aggression in the post-World War II period. That was said by the Secretary General at the time. So now when we come back to where we are today, for the United States to be demanding a halt to what they call illegal settlement really makes a joke of international law that the United States itself signed onto when it signed on in 1995 to the Oslo Agreement.
The problem is that Biden administration, in spite of what happened in the last 30 years from Oslo Agreement until today, they still hold to the idea of two-state solution, even though, according to Palestinian public opinion polls, most of the Palestinians do not believe in this solution. They don't want a two-state solution.
What are your people telling you? By the way, you have some of the best contacts that any Israeli has, whether he's in government service or out. What are the Palestinians that you talk to? And you talk to people in the security services, you talk to people in the political echelons, you talk to journalists. What are they saying? It's important for our listeners to understand, because there is so much misinformation about what's really going on in the Palestinian street. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that our friends in the United States make. They don't speak to people on the ground, so they don't really know what's happening. They speak to people who used to, on the level of Saib Arakat, who passed away
the corona
from corona and smoking and so on. But the point is, they don't speak to the bazaar. They don't speak to business people. They don't speak to opinion makers, and they're getting misinformation.
I'll answer you shortly. The bottom line is that talking about today, the Palestinian street, most of the people, more than 90%, they don't want the PA rule. They think that Mahmoud Abbas and the gang that's surrounding him, they are called in Arabic Sahija. There's a special nickname for them, Sahija.
What does it mean, Sahija?
Sahija, it means those who clap all the time to Mahmoud Abbas. Whatever he does, whatever he says, they call in Arabic Sahija. This is their nickname. They want to get rid of them. They are corrupt. And they don't want a two-state solution with Israel. They want this. 90% of them support the armed struggle against Israel. They are very encouraged from these terror groups that emerged in the north of the West Bank. They want them to spread all over the West Bank, topple the regime of the PA, have elections, have other people elected as the leaders of Palestinian people, and fight Israel. This is what they want. They're not talking about peace and two-state solution. This is an illusion and dream of the Biden administration.
I will tell you one thing, though, Yoni. If you look at some of the more isolated cases, like the local government in Hebron, The local government in Hebron does not even look towards the PA in Ramallah for permission.
The clans.
The clans.
Yeah.
If I can make an argument that if Israel were to appeal just to the clans and with tens of thousands of jobs, the way Israel, by the way, is behaving in the 16 industrial and commercial areas in Area C, where you have a very successful economic experiment. You have 35 to 40,000 Palestinian wage earners earning 250 to 300% more than they do in the Palestinian Authority-controlled areas, and those are areas without terror attacks in those commercial areas because it's in their complete interest. They're feeding about 200,000 Palestinian people, meaning 40,000 Palestinian families. And I would argue, in contradistinction to the important point you made about public support for terror, that there's also public support for calm if there are opportunities there via the clans and not the PA.
Yeah, but you cannot make any business with the PA because all the money that you give them and the donors countries, they have a bad experience. Everything disappears. They're so corrupted that nothing gets to the people in Judea and Samaria, to Palestinian residents. All the projects for building hospitals, schools, the money disappeared. They got the money, the PA took the money and didn't build anything. It's all being embezzled by the PA. The money didn't get to what it was intended to. So this is very worrying.
By the way, this is exactly what the Saudis are saying, Yoni, right? The Saudis, look, you and I both have spoken to Gulf leaders. I've spoken to Saudi journalists, and they all say, halas, the Palestinians are the thieves. This is what they say. The Palestinian leaders are the thieves of the assistance money that we gave them, and that's why, as of 2020, the BDS that the Palestinian leadership did to their Gulf brothers, especially in the Al-Aqsa compound.
Yeah.
That if you go as a Saudi or as a Bahraini or as an Emirati with the Galabiya, they will spit on you, they will stone you, they'll throw shoes on you. People in the West don't realize this, that there is effective BDS from the Palestinian leadership towards the Gulf leadership when it comes to the Al-Aqsa compound.
Right, exactly. So this is why the PA now is in a very serious financial crisis. And they want Israel to help them because the money is not coming from anywhere. Nobody trusts them. So this explains the situation on the ground.
So we're arguing against, the argument that you and I are making here is a proof text as to why normalization, tatbiya, will not happen anytime soon if it is dependent on some sort of sovereign Palestinian entity that would prevent Israel from hot pursuit. I remember former National Security Advisor Yaakov Amidor wrote a very interesting article for the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs back 10, 11 years ago about the great difficulty for any democratic country to penetrate or invade another sovereign territory, as opposed to a situation like today where the Judea and Samaria is not sovereign but disputed territory.
This is why I prefer the current situation, because just this morning, for instance, the IDF made the hot pursuit into Jenin after he refrained from going into Jenin for 1 month after the Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas visited Jenin. He said that the PA can take control of security in Jenin, and this morning the IDF had to enter Jenin again and arrest 2 terrorists that were planning a terror attack in Israel. So this shows you that the current situation is better, because if they give them anything independent, they don't fight terrorism. They don't do anything, and terrorism is flourishing there, and only when there is an overall security responsibility in the Israeli hands, then we can be more sure that we can fight terrorism. But once you give them sovereignty or independence or whatever you want to call it, they just don't fight terrorism.
Well, I think what we've proven here in the last half hour is that the normalization honey trap laid perhaps in the Middle East between Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is just that. It's a temptation. It's a prime rib. It's a big, fat steak, but it's held outside the the prison bars, if you want to use that as an analogy.
You can fantasize about it, but you will never get there.
Yeah, it's normalization under the current conditions that Washington has laid down has brought the Saudis to be very polite, to take a ride in the big American Chevrolet down the highway of potential normalization. But if Israel has its glasses on properly and its head screwed on straight, it'll see very clearly that fantasy is not reality. And in fact, as you've said very well on this podcast, portends great dangers for the state of Israel beyond those which it is already confronting. Yoni Ben Menahem, thank you for this very stimulating discussion. I think my blood pressure has risen now thanks to Yoni Ben Menahem and the dangers that Israel faces and that, in fact, the whole Western Alliance faces. So I think we should all take a deep breath. We should all have a scotch and, relax a little bit.
Yeah.
No normalization under these conditions in the coming period, but yes to vigilance and yes to hope. And you know what? Yes to peace. Everybody here is pro-peace, but we have to do peace that is staged. The pathway to progress is slow. This is al-Shaq al-Asadlana. This is a Middle East that is developing slowly, notwithstanding the earthquakes that have taken place in the last few years. We'll continue on this program to gauge and monitor this very complex, colorful region called our Middle East. Yoni Ben Menahem, thank you so much
for having me.